Welcome, 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 and two more welcomes to everybody out there. Welcome and welcome, part of our continuing series where we talk to reporters, writers, columnists, activists, anybody on the left, anybody on the right. As long as they have thoughtful perspectives, we want to bring them unedited and unaltered directly to you, the public, so that you could do this thing that was popular when I was in high school called thinking for yourself. Maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't, who knows. With us today, it is our privilege to have Chen. She is a professor of information at the University of Michigan School of Information. She's also the Daniel Kahneman Collegiate Professor of Information, a research professor at the Research Center for Group Dynamics, and a distinguished visiting professor from Tsinghua University, which is one of the best universities in China, to the best of my knowledge. Research summary: Chen is the Daniel Kahneman Collegiate Professor in the School of Information at the University of Michigan. She also holds an appointment as a research professor with the U of M Institute of Social Research. Her research interests are in behavioral and experimental economics, market and mechanism design, and public economics. She conducts both theoretical and experimental research. Some of her working papers are Putting Teams into a Gig Economy, Field Experiment at Ride-Sharing Platform, Motivating Experts to Contribute to Digital Public Goods, a Personalized Field Experiment at Wikipedia. That sounds very interesting. She also studies, though, social identity and teams. Some of the work that she's done: social identity, group behavior, and teams. Does team competition increase pro-social lending? Recommending teams promotes pro-social lending and online microfinance. Which hat to wear? Impact of natural identities on coordination and cooperation, the potential of social identity for equilibrium selection, and group identity and social preferences, all relevant to our topic here. She's held the Collegiate Professor of Information at Michigan to present. She's also been an Amazon scholar at Amazon Incorporated, professor at the Research Center for Group Dynamics, Institute for Social Research. She was also a faculty associate at the Lieberthal Rogers Center for Chinese Studies at the University of Michigan. She's been at Tsinghua University. She's also been a visiting professor at Stanford University, Shanghai University, visiting scholar, Haas School of Business, Berkeley University, back to Michigan. Also 2 terms at the University of Bonn, also very distinguished, University of Michigan, and then back here, she was a translator at the Chinese Aviation Museum. And this is the research where I found the professor: group identity and opinion formation with applications to political polarization. But before we get into that, let's check in and see how well we did. Professor, did I misstate anything? Is there anything we need to correct for the record? Did I get anything wrong? I need to correct that.
Oh, that's very precise. Thank you.
Okay, hey, we got the first part done. Good job, guys. Okay, now we're going to move on to the second part. This wasn't exactly, I believe, a research paper. A lot of people we talk to have done specific research paper. Now, obviously, you are very well researched on the topic of identity and group formation. What was this? This is a workshop where you were trying to teach students. What was happening?
So it is actually a seminar series. And so
Okay.
we do have a research paper, and right now it's in the working paper format, so it's not published yet. And but it's moving along the pipeline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, so this is basically a seminar based on the working paper.
Part of a workshop series, the Economic Paradigm Change, collaboratively hosted by the Global Solutions Institute Initiative, the New Institute, Pro-Social World, and INET Oxford. Identifying the determinants of political polarization is a pressing issue across social sciences. Using an online experiment with nationally representative participants deployed the week prior to the 2020 U.S. presidential election, very interesting, we explore how partisan group identity impacts the process of political opinion formation. Assessing group identity through in-group favoritism in monetary allocations, we incentivize subjects to predict policy-sensitive statistics 1 year post-election, conditional on which candidate becomes president. Our results show that people who exhibit in-group favoritism show a stronger partisan gap in initial predictions, spend more resources to avoid articles from politically opposing sources, and increase their partisan gap more strongly after reading relevant news articles. Exogenously reducing the salience of group identity decreases partisan bias and information avoidance, especially for in-group favoring individuals. What is this study about?
Hmm.
It sounds like another study on in-group favoritism. People seem to favor their in-group, and they have negative opinions of the out-group that are perhaps more exacerbated than reality. What are you covering here, Professor? What is this study roughly about?
Yeah, so um, we actually conducted 3 waves of online experiments. So this is about the first wave, which was conducted the week before the 2020 presidential election. So what we try to do is that, there, as you mentioned, that there have been thousands of studies from psychology, political science, economics about group identity. So, where do we come in? We would like to actually understand political polarization from the group identity lens. And we would like to decompose polarization into people's prior beliefs and how they process new information. I think what's different, what differentiates our study from lots of the previous studies is that we use incentivized tasks. So this differentiates experimental economics from, for instance, experimental psychology and so on. We incentivize them to make the accurate predictions and look at how they lean and how they process new information. And so, right, the week before the presidential election in 2020, we recruited a representative sample of US adults from an online platform. And we first measure their sort of groupiness by asking them, randomly assign them to some meaningless groups. We call them circle and triangle. And they knew that they were randomly assigned. And we asked them to allocate $6 between someone from their in group versus someone from their out group. And we replicated the classic psychology study, which finds that people systematically favor their in group at the expense of the out group members. And that's, about 30% of the people systematically exhibit that in sort of meaningless groups. And we call these people groupie. Um, and they, because they sort of exhibit this sensitivity to a group setting, even though the group is meaningless. And then we elicit their political affiliation. And this time we ask them to allocate, the same amount of money to a randomly selected Democrat or a Republican. And at this point, we have 2/3 of the people who are groupie, who favor their in group at the expense of the out group. But what's interesting is that they're highly correlated. So the minimally, with meaningless groups, if you're a groupie, you're 80% more likely to be groupie in the political context as well. So we can use the first method to basically label you, classify you as groupie or non-groupie in other contexts. And then we incentivize them to predict 3 things. One is, not surprisingly, who will become the president. The second prediction is, conditional if Biden becomes the president, what will be the unemployment rate in September 2021? So that's almost a year out. And what will be the US public health system ranking in September 2021? So that's based on the US News and World Report ranking. And we tell them what the September 2020 ranking numbers are for each of these. If they get it right, they're paid $10 for each correct guess.
Okay.
Okay, so they
Okay.
should have an incentive to get it right. Instead of, I just want to feel good. So if I'm a Democrat, I would say Biden will win. If I'm a Republican, I'll say Trump will win. But they're actually incentivized to actually get it right. And then we basically give them new information. We give them, we look at what is their demand for information. So we ask them to choose between a news article from left-leaning media and one from neutral media than choosing from neutral and right-leaning media. So left-leaning media, you can think of the New York Times. Neutral, you should think of Nature, right? It's a scientific journal. And right-leaning Wall Street Journal, Fox News, and so on. And so they're always choosing between neutral and left or right-leaning media. And we find that people, if they do nothing, they get 50% chance of reading one of the articles. But we give them some money so they can spend money to increase the probability of reading an article from a favorite source. So what we find is that when you ask people, do you want to change the probability from 50-50 to reading, a Nature article versus a New York Times article or versus a Wall Street Journal article covering the same subject? People are actually indifferent. So they don't mind reading a neutral article. And what's interesting and important is when they're choosing between neutral and outgroup media, there's a strong tendency to spend your endowment to increase the likelihood that you would receive the neutral rather than the outgroup media. So we call this outgroup information avoidance. So they come in with strong prior, right, that favor their in-group candidate and in-group candidate's policy. And when they have an opportunity to choose what new information to read so that they can get a more accurate forecast, they overwhelmingly choose to avoid outgroup media. And then we, again, in the third stage, we force everyone to read 2 articles covering either, public health or the economy. We give them 2 news article summaries in random order, one from left, one from right. And so everyone were exposed to the same set of articles. Afterwards, we asked them to update their predictions. So the latest updates are what counts, right?
Okay.
And 50% of the people don't update at all. The other 50%, I guess, updating opposite directions. So a quarter updates in the direction of becoming more polarized. The other quarter update in the direction of being less polarized. So on average, because the 50% who didn't update, who initially were pretty polarized already, ex post, you also have polarization. But what we can do is, what we were able to do is to break down their opinion formation process into their prior belief and their information demand and how they process new information. And then at the end, we ask them to do a very neutral, statistical updating task, which is, you have 2 urns, a yellow urn and a green urn. The yellow urn has 2 yellow marbles and a green marble. The green urn has 2 green marbles and a yellow marble, right? So each urn is drawn with probability a half, so they're equally likely to be drawn. We're going to show you a randomly drawn marble, and you tell us which urn it's drawn from. And upon, that task, Republicans and Democrats are equally likely to get it right. So
Okay.
67%, 2/3 of each group got it right, got the urn question right. So they're identical in terms of neutral statistical updating task. It's a very simple task. The marble coming out of the urn is an informative signal, so that you should just go with the color of the marble, and we find that about 2/3 of the people from either party got it right. So when it's out of the political context, the way they process information is the same. It's the political context that add the complexity that causes what we call polarization. At the end of this, we pay them for a series, the task they performed. And then at the end of January, we basically call the same group of people back and pay them for the prediction of the presidential election, right? So the first one of the three predictions are realized. So we pay them for that. And then we ask them just to do a number of, the marbles from the urn task to look at how they process information. And we first asked them, what do you think? What's the overall 67% of the participants from November got the marbles and urns right. What's your estimate of the proportion of Democrats, the Republicans, who got it right? And it turns out that each group think that their own group members was smarter. They're more likely to get it right. But in fact, and then we tell them they're actually equal. They're exactly the same in terms of accuracy. And then they get to, do a bunch of the marbles and urns tasks. And this time we'll tell them the guess of, a Democrat or a Republican and ask them, would you rather see a guess of a Republican or a Democrat? And they can spend resources. So even when the information is in a completely neutral context, and we tell them Republicans and Democrats are equally accurate in this task, the groupie people, remember the groupie peoples are those who in meaningless groups still favor their in-group. The groupie people still spend resources to avoid guesses, seeing the guesses from out groups, whereas the non-groupie people actually, are, not willing to spend monetary endowments to move the information sources anymore. So that's the second wave. In the third wave, the third wave was conducted in November 2021. That's after the other two predictions were realized. And we wanted to see, it would take another natural identity, and this time it's state identity. We want to see, are they more like the minimum groups, the meaningless randomly assigned groups, in terms of how they treat their in-state versus out-state people, participants? Or are they more like the political groups? And we find that they're actually more like the randomly assigned groups. So in other words, the very first task that we asked them to do, where we just give them $6 so they can allocate between an in-group member and an out-group member for, circles and triangles, also essentially predict how they allocate between someone from Michigan versus someone from Ohio. So the sort of groupiness seems to be an ingrained trait among a lot of people. And you can, and we look at their behavior in wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, and they're very stable. So we can use their wave 1 allocation task to predict how polarized they become, how they process information, their information demand, and predict how groupie they will be in wave 2 in January, and then in September the following year. It predicts really well. So which means that it's a simple task that we can use to essentially identify how sensitive people are to the intergroup context.
So 1/3 of the population is very sensitive to being identified with a group, even if the group identity is very random. Is that?
Yes, exactly. And so that's actually consistent with previous experiments conducted in the US and also in the United Kingdom.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we could roughly say 1/3 on each side, 1/3 on the Democrats, 1/3 on the Republicans.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think you also said that when you make it more political or add money, then the amount of groupings goes up? Or did I misunderstand that?
Oh, so the first task is using randomly assigned groups. The second task, we actually use political groups. So we say, after people complete a survey telling us whether they're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, and if they're an independent, we ask them whether they lean Democrat or lean Republican.
Right.
So we can put everybody into one of two buckets.
Okay.
And then each person is going to basically be matched with two other people, one, drawn from each bucket. And so, for instance, you'll be asked, now you have $6 and you're matched with a randomly drawn Republican and a randomly drawn Democrat. How much do you want to allocate to each? And in this case, we find that actually 2/3 of the people are groupie, politically groupie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when the identity is just random,
Yeah.
about a third of the population's like, oh, I'm attached to this. But the moment you start doing political identifiers, Republican, Independent, Democratic, that number seems to go from 1/3 to 2/3.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So this seems to back up. There's a lot of research I've seen. So there's this idea out there that we can fix political polarization by just getting more people to vote and getting more people activated. And then I thought that seems like a good idea. But then I read some research that said, hold on, the more active people get into politics, the more likely they are to become polarized. That seems to back up your study. I mean, the moment we start activating political identity, people start to in-group, out-group immediately, or at least the majority of them.
Yeah. Although we do have an intervention that I haven't mentioned, which
Okay.
is in the first wave, when we give them news sources, news article summaries, we unlabeled half of the articles. So we basically give the control condition. You see the news article, you also see where it's from. Whether it's from the Wall Street Journal or Nature or Fox News. In the unlabeled condition, we actually took out the labels and we just give you snippets of the article. It turns out when you unlabel the articles, news articles, it reduces the demand to avoid outgroup information by about half.
Wow.
Yeah. So that is essentially that saying, the result says that if you just make it less salient, make the political connotations of these articles less salient, just give them the information, people's avoidance of outgroup information goes down by half.
Seems like if you remove any of the identity markings,
Yes.
absorbing the information. I don't know if it's Fox. I don't know if it's MSNBC. There's nothing to tell me if this is coming from the right or the left. I have to kind of figure that out on my own. And you're saying just doing that, just removing the identity markings, removing the left, right. I can tell where this information comes. I don't know where it came from. It's just a snippet of information that's true.
Yeah.
50% automatic reduction in polarization.
Right. Well, it's not reduction in polarization, but you can think of that as breaking the bubble.
Reduction in grouping.
In sort of the demand for in-group information rather than out-group information.
That's actually very promising. I haven't heard anyone mention that. It's not a 100% reduction, but 50% is pretty big. I mean, that's definitely something we could do. If we could get everyone in America to absorb their news without any political identifying markers, then maybe we could make things better. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think in terms of the intervention, I think there's sort of two lessons from wave one. One is when you unlabel, when you decrease, take away the labels of different information sources, people's outgroup information avoidance is cut by half. The other part that we find interesting is that people are actually not more in favor of in-group compared to neutral information sources.
Okay.
So the neutral, basically from the left or the right, people are fine with neutral information sources such as Nature, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Associated Press. So information sources that are known for being nonpartisan.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the key. If I know it's not the other group's information,
Yeah.
then I'll be willing to listen to it because at least it's
Yeah.
not against me and my group.
Right. Right. So I think it behooves news organizations to actually develop a reputation for moving more towards the neutral.
I mean, this makes sense. When I've talked to some people in Germany, and they have different parties, but they say, we don't have polarization like you guys do in America. And they go, one thing is that everybody watches like the 2 or 3 channels of German news, and everybody believes they're fair. You may not hear what you want to hear, but nobody in Germany is going, I don't know. I think, Deutsche Welle is completely, they don't have that. They have 2 or 3 channels. Everybody gets the same information, and they're viewed as mutual, not partisan. I'm sure there's some people who don't think that in Germany, but overall, and I thought, yeah, we don't have that here. We don't have 2 or 3 sources, and everybody goes, yep, I mean, it's not what I want to hear, but that's got to be a fact. And one of the things I've also heard a lot of professors who study this say was, we used to have that in America in the 50s and 60s and 70s. We used to have the big three, network television. And I'm sure there was bias, and I'm sure there was media censorship, but everybody got the same news. There wasn't really a difference of opinion about, was the Vietnam War going bad or good once Walter Cronkite said we're losing. So that would seem to make sense. Was there any other interesting tidbits, insights you had from the study about how we could heal America of political polarization? You obviously gave a good one already, remove some of the identifying markers of the news. Was there other stuff that you saw from your study that might give insight into how we can at least maybe not fix, but reduce?
Right. So that comes from our intervention from the second wave, which we essentially had a debiasing treatment. So the debiasing treatment is just, we told half of the participants after they guess, after they, we asked them to estimate how many, the proportion of Republicans versus Democrats who got the marbles and urns problem right in the first stage. And everybody, on average, everybody thought that their in-group members were smarter. And then we said, yeah, guess what? They're 67% for each. They're exactly the same. Once you provide that information, the non-groupie people, remember, 2/3 of our participants are non-groupie. The non-groupie people stop demanding their own group guesses. So they're willing to take in-group and out-group guesses. And so I guess one way to generalize that is to say that, we need to humanize the other side and stop demonizing the other side. Just knowing that from a simple statistical learning task, that each side did exactly the same. We didn't even lie. We did not lie to them. They did exactly the same. They were equally accurate. That they're equally smart. Would remove some of the unwillingness to only hear from your own side. So sort of humanizing the other side and, tell the good stories. I think would, in the long run, have a positive effect on reducing polarization.
So don't say that half of America is, full of people who hate America and want to bring it down from the inside. And on the reverse, don't go around saying that the other half are people who are just an existential threat to democracy. And, just because now you're making them enemies, that's not just another political party I disagree with. It's an existential threat. It's an enemy. Oh my God, it's the end of the world if their people win. We need to calm down that sort of language, I think you're saying.
Yes, and we also need to say that, people are multidimensional. There are lots of different aspects. I have neighbors from different political groups, and I see a lot more of them. I see my neighbor from the opposing political party who were always watching out for the neighborhood. He's retired and he sent out messages whenever there are thefts or anything happening, to everyone in the neighborhood. And I know that, he's a genuinely kind person, even though we have different political views,
Of
and,
course.
and that's important. Yeah, is to get along and see that everyone has a lot of different dimensions to themselves. And we did a very simple manipulation. We just say that you guys are equally smart. That's it. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. The other side isn't just dumb and crazy, and that's why they came to their opinions. They're seeing something.
Yes.
Did you personally notice any change in polarization in Michigan? You've been there for a few years.
Uh,
Did you notice anything maybe before Trump or with the rise of Trump, and has it calmed down since then? Just personally, not as an academic,
yeah.
personally living in Michigan with 2 eyeballs.
Right. I live in a college town, so Ann Arbor has always been, very safe, well
Okay,
educated, and so
okay,
on. So when Trump came to power, we did have incidents of, for instance, Muslim students got pushed to the streets and, name calls and stuff like that.
hmm,
I think the university has done a lot to make sure that everyone feel included as part of the university community. It does feel that the situation is getting better in Ann Arbor. It wasn't terrible to start with,
right.
but it's getting better, and we don't hear these incidences anymore. The fact that, for instance, around 2016, it was the Muslim students getting demonized, getting portrayed as the outsider. During COVID, it was the Chinese Americans, the Chinese who got demonized.
Right, right, right.
And now I feel like we are um, more together than before.
Pardon me for 1 second. I just need
Yeah.
20 seconds to plug in a power cord to my laptop.
Oh yeah, sure.
20 seconds. I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Nope. Okay. We are going to switch studios.
Oh, okay.
Just for the remainder, we're almost done. Last questions, if I may. This is one I always ask. You're not you. You're not me.
Mm-hmm.
You're a third-party person watching this interview, and they learned a lot. Some interesting things they weren't aware of before. And it's a week later after they've watched this video, and they're struggling to kind of remember all the stuff, but they're saying to themselves, I'm struggling to remember everything I learned in that interview, but there was this one thing that the professor said about polarization, and I can't get that out of my head. What is that one thing you'd like a random viewer of this video to not be able to stop thinking about 5 days after they finish watching this interview?
Downplay the partisan labels. That would help. Don't always think of another person as a member of the Democratic Party or the Republicans. Not think of them. Don't think of them as, a labeled person, but think of every person as having a lots of different identities.
Interesting. Everyone's complex. They're not just a two-dimensional shell.
Right.
They have desires and wants, and they're three-dimensional, and maybe they were harmed in the past, and maybe they have an opinion about this, an opinion about that. See them as an actual individual, complex and all.
Right.
Okay. I hope you found this was a fair interview.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't have to, but we always ask. Do you have any recommendations? Do you know maybe someone at the University of Michigan or
Hmm.
another professor, anybody willing to talk about this? They could be an activist, they could be a professor. You don't have to, but we always like to try to keep the conversation going. Do you have any recommendations?
Um, I would recommend two people.
Okay.
One is Scott Page. I don't know whether you've had him.
No, no.
Yeah, he's a fun person to
Okay.
have on the show. The other one is, Scott Page is both an economist and political scientist. The other person is Ken Coleman from the political science department at Michigan.
Kim Coven is in Michigan.
Ken Coleman, yeah.
And how do you spell her last name?
The last name is Kollman. I'll send you an email.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Scott Page. Where's Scott Page at?
He's at the Ross School of Business at Michigan, and I think he has joint appointments in the economics department and also in the political science department.
I really appreciate that. Any information you have, I appreciate that. I want to say thank you for your time, Professor. I know you're very busy. Thank you for your time. I will send you a copy of the video shortly.
Thank
And
you.
I really appreciate you taking the time to explain to the public the research, like we were talking about, not dumb it down, keep the intellectualism, but make it so that the average public can watch a video and understand. Uh, at least that's the goal of the series. Have a bunch of videos and people can just watch and go, I get it. I get it. And make up their own opinion. And I really appreciate you helping out with that project.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay. I'll email you shortly. Thank you, Professor.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.